it, and he found the place where it was written about him. He found the place where his purpose was written. And I'm going to turn to it. Luke chapter 4, and we're going to start with verse 16. It says, "So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovery of what? Of sight to the blind.'" Now, it does include people that are blind naturally, but in the scope of life and in the scope of humanity, that number is not that large. So he wasn't just coming for the physical blind. He was coming for those of us who had been blinded by the God of this world. Our minds had been blinded. He was talking about us. He came to restore the same sight that God gave Adam and Eve in the beginning. The sight that says, I refuse to look at circumstances. I refuse to look at anything but what you said about this situation. That's the sight that Jesus came to return to us. And ultimately, he said to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So we have no excuse not to see like God sees, because Jesus came to restore that sight for us. We'll see an example of this in Acts, and let's go to chapter 9. And chapter 9 of Acts, now I know I gave that to y'all. There we go. Chapter 9 of Acts, we know that Saul, before he became Paul, his mission was to destroy, to persecute, to kill the believers. And he was committed to that because that's what he was able to see. And given the fact that he had all of this intelligence, the fact that he was a Pharisee and he knew the law, he knew everything, so he thought he was driven by this. He was convinced that he was doing the will of God. So it wasn't just some deranged man that, had this mission that had this thought on his own. He was convinced that he was doing God's will. And in chapter 9, verse 3, it says, "As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' And he was like, 'Who are you, Lord?' And Saul asked, and Jesus said, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting,' he replied. 'Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do.' The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless, because they heard the sound, but did not see anyone. So then Saul got up from the ground, and when he had opened his eyes, he couldn't see anything. So they led him by the hand into Damascus for 3 days, and he was blind and did not eat or drink anything." Have you ever thought about why it was that it was his eyes that were not attacked, but that God dealt with first? That's just kind of a rhetorical question. One of those questions that make you say, if y'all remember the reference to that. But anyway, God blinded his eyes. He got up, he could no longer see. And then it says in verse 17, and before verse 17, God had started dealing with a man named Ananias, and he was telling him that Saul was on his way, that he was to meet Saul at this particular place so that he could lay hands on him. And Saul had a reputation. He was like, I ain't going nowhere near him. And God said, that's okay, that's okay. He's good.